Hello there, kia ora. It's been yet another long week, and here are bits of it from the Omnibus from the episodes that I've put out. There's been work from home issues, there's been the spookfish, and everything in between. And today, while I'm recording this, there's 35,000 people marching the streets through Otago, Dunedin because of the hospital downgrade that the government announced over the last 48 hours. It's a really tough time for everyone out there at the moment, and it's only, just shy of a year from when this government was elected. We're coming up to 12 months now, and it's felt like the longest decade ever for a lot of people. So, enjoy this week's Omnibus. I tried to make it less draining than usual. It's not always possible. And for the people of Whangarei, if there's anybody in here from there, there's a bit of an announcement for you at the end of the Omnibus as well. Until then, enjoy the episodes, or sit in the corner crying. Both are actually really valid options right now to help you deal with whatever emotions it is that you're dealing with. Hello there, kia ora. Coming up over the next year, discussions are going to heat up around a change to parliamentary terms. You see, our parliament has had 3-year terms since the mid-1870s, when Winston was first elected. Before that, they had 5-year terms, and part of the reason for that was the lack of political parties. It wasn't the only reason for the change, but a parliament full of independent MPs means it took a lot longer to form a working administration, especially when the fastest way to travel was horse and cart, and carrier pigeons were the fastest way to communicate, which meant it took a lot longer to any policies to get implemented, or a long time to have those policies create an impact. But 5 years is also a long time when things don't go according to plan. So in the mid-1870s, that was changed to a 3-year term with an aim of encouraging faster action and meaning less time between elections for when something went wrong with the government in the eyes of the voters. This, in part, actually led to the evolution of political parties here, a group of candidates who'd be able to quickly form a working government. In the 1871 election, which was held between the 14th of January and the 23rd of February, it took until August the 14th to form a government to be sworn in. In 1890, the first election to have political parties elected, it took from December, when the Māori electorate votes happened, until January to settle the new government. Quick footnote, until 1951, Māori electorates had different election days to general electorates, and to this day, Māori electorates still aren't protected by the need of a supermajority for them to be removed. To change parliamentary terms is a big deal. It requires either a supermajority in Parliament of 75% to change something constitutional, or a majority in a public referendum. And both ACT and New Zealand First have it in their coalition agreement that the change of term length would be looked at or taken to public referendum. This would actually be the third time that's happened. In 1967, 68% of respondents said to keep it at 3 years. In 1990, that number went up to 69%. And the truth is, there are advantages and disadvantages to both options. The most prevalent conversation you're going to hear around it is almost always going to be, well, if it's my team, I want longer terms. A shorter term does mean more political accountability more often. It helps politicians to stay responsive to public needs, and it gives voters more regular opportunity to have their say, especially in an MMP environment where we've seen instability in the past between coalition partners. But a longer term will give government more time to implement long-term policies without the changing whims of the voters impacting their work. If we had 4-year terms, for example, we'd still have fair pay agreements, the Māori Health Authority, 3 water infrastructure planning, unemployment levels would still be considered by the Reserve Bank when setting inflation rates, and civil servants would still be able to work from home on occasion instead of being forced to commute to the office every day, despite 2020 Proto-School research showing 47% increase in productivity with technological advancements, and that same research showing 73% of workers citing work from home leading to better work-life balances, and 86% said it helped to lower stress. The idea of having a 4-year term, though, is widely supported across parties in Parliament. Not only have New Zealand First and ACT both vocally supported a longer term, so is the Greens' Marama Davidson, but with the caveat that it should be done with really close input from tangata whenua and also looking at lowering the voting age to 16 at the same time. Labour's Chris Hipkins says he's open to it, National have said the same thing, and to be fair, I haven't found the official Te Pāti Māori stance on the topic. History unfortunately doesn't hold any clues either as to how people will vote. In the 67 referenda, both Labour and National supported longer terms, and it was in the middle of a 4-term run with National in charge. And it was held between election cycles, and it still failed. In 1990, both parties also supported that longer term, but that came on the back of 6 years of economically tough times under the Longy government, and preceding that was 9 years under Muldoon, which led to voters being kind of dissatisfied with long-term governments. The referendum was held as part of the general election, which saw a change of government. See, this would be the first time since the introduction of MMP that we would be making that choice, and the potential instability of MMP governments will play a factor in how the public vote. Ultimately, though, the arguments on both sides hold water. Yes, a short term lets us hold power to account more often, and longer terms would allow governments to think in longer terms when it comes to outcomes. And even if voters in 2026 chose to change, that wouldn't come into play until 2029. And supporters of both left and right of politics will always argue about what it would mean to have their team or the other side in power even longer, which means it really will come down to what you feel as an individual when it comes to making a choice. And the public will have the ultimate say on the decision once again. Hello there, kia ora. On Monday, we saw a masterclass in trying to fix a problem that someone had exacerbated without taking responsibility of having exacerbated that problem, when Nicola Willis changed the rules around working from home for government employees to help save Wellington's CBD. And there's lots of complicating factors here at play, like the fact that Wellington isn't the only centre where the CBD is struggling, or that our method for shopping has been evolving over decades, that mountains of research have found that while work from home is preferred by employees and tends to lead to people being more productive, that it's not liked by employers and can sometimes make employees feel like they're missing out on things like promotions or social interaction. That businesses often feel that they need a single target to blame for downturn periods, but the reality is there's often no magic bullet to fix it. But the narrative that was presented by the finance minister is one of entitled staff creating the lament of cafe owners by selfishly just choosing to stay home whenever they like and putting it on the national stage actually makes it seem like a huge problem when in reality it's a decision that impacts maybe about 2% of the workforce nationally. The reality is very different to the narrative presented. No civil servant is working from home without the authorization of their management, and definitely not working from home considering it an entitlement, and very few, if any, are working from home full time. They have more of a hybrid working arrangement of 3 days in the office, 2 at home each week. This helps with productivity, ensures social interaction, helps decrease issues around congestion, and allows staff a better work-life balance. For some who may be dealing with a disability or childcare, work from home is a great tool to ensure that they can still be productive and meet the needs that they have in other areas. But what Wellington has that has had a bigger impact on CBD spending that no other centre has is a concentration of government workers, a sector that's seen over 6,000 people laid off already. And some economists are predicting that that's just the start to meet the spending caps imposed by the government, which has disproportionately impacted numbers in that area specifically, in the midst of a recession during a cost of living crisis. So people have less discretionary money to spend on non-essentials, which, that money still has to cover the rising costs of essentials like power. And this government has told government employees not to expect a pay rise this year. Since this government took power, Wellington has been the region which has seen the biggest increase in unemployment levels. And those government sector roles aren't the only ones that are being lost due to government choices. After all, they campaigned and were pushing for the loss of major infrastructure overhauls like Let's Get Wellington Moving. The construction sector had major declines. The creative sector had major funding cuts. Sectors that government policy directly impacts are suffering, and tourism still recovering from the impacts of pandemic measures. The inaction of this government on the cost of living crisis impacts Wellington workers as much as it impacts everyone else around the country. But it's not like there's a regional fuel tax there that the government can remove to say, they're fixing the problem. Well, passing the costs on to local government, which increases rates, which keeps pressure on the cost of living crisis like they did in Auckland. And it's surely a coincidence that right-leaning media personalities that are soft on this government spent the weekend lamenting work from home as an excuse for people to take 4-day weekends. The fact is, there's many businesses out there struggling all over the country, but the factors that are leading to the struggle aren't caused by some workers working from home some of the time. If we look at comparable countries like Australia, the UK, and America, they've managed to grow their economies, even if it's only just growth, and get their inflation relatively under control, facing the same international pressures we have, and arguably from a worse position than this government started from. What the Wellington CBD and business areas all over the country are dealing with are changes to the way we have evolved our lifestyles to deal with changes in technology, communication, transport, and social interaction, and the impacts of the government's decisions to tank the economy, to underfund the machinery that makes our economy and the country work, to pay for their tax cuts. The answer isn't conservatives telling people to have more avocado toast, but it is refreshing, I guess, that they haven't told struggling business owners to cut back on that like they often do when it's workers and young people struggling. Hello there, kia ora. It's impossible to measure social cohesion in a way that gives us a result that says specifically, this is how cohesive society is right now. But there are a range of tools and markers that can be used to give an idea as to where things stand. Here in Aotearoa, one of those tools is the Stats NZ biannual research piece called the General Social Survey. Every second year, Stats NZ find out how satisfied we are with our lives. And while this year's overall satisfaction score is on par with the last survey, well, there's been some significant drops in some key social cohesion areas, like how safe people feel. Despite a decline, people reported still having relatively high trust in the police and declining trust in the media. People felt less safe about our healthcare system. They had lower levels of trust in the courts, they felt less safe out at night, and they had tanking levels of trust for our parliament. I wonder why that might be. And people also reported feeling far more concerned about crime than they did in 2021. And there may actually be some clues in other data sets that let us work out why Auckland, the Bay of Plenty, and the Manawatu Whanganui areas were the areas which recorded the most significant changes in fear and worry about the effects of crime. And there is an interesting connection amongst all three of those regions. But it should also be noted that in 2021, at the time of the last survey, we'd just come out of lockdowns, which had seen record drops in crime rates nationwide, so criminal activity was lower at the time as rates readjusted for life under various level restrictions. Those three areas I mentioned, though, well, they were all identified as electoral areas National felt that they could flip in 2023. See, here's the police area map, and here's a map of the 2017 election outcomes. Large areas are covered in blue because of the traditional rural voting base that tends to give National their party vote. The deeper the blue, the higher percentage those electorates gave their party vote to National. In 2020, we see a clear shift. Not only does Labour win seats in the Bay of Plenty and Whanganui and around the Manawatu, but the percentage of National Party votes dropped from those deep blue areas from 2017. But the 2023 election saw them return to a dark blue. National and right-wing parties in general like to campaign on tough-on-crime rhetoric that criminal justice experts call fearmongering. They do this by cherry-picking crime data, and the media tends to amplify that, which is what we saw when there was that whole crazy ram raid frenzy going on, when the media blew the problem way out of proportion when the actual numbers were in decline. Crime and punishment were key messaging elements used by National Party to woo back their voters in 2023. And the way this works best is by creating fear around rampant, out-of-control crime. And ram raids was one of the most used criminal activities to do this. The reality is that in the three regions showcasing the biggest change of fear factor around crime, well, crime rates over the period of the survey were in decline or remaining steady, which means that perception of crime was higher than the reality, which means something was driving that perception. Yeah, let's take a look at an example. These are all headlines from mainstream media in the lead up to the election on the existential horror of ram raids. Fear inducing dramatic language that implies a major crisis. In fact, this story even had statistics about the dramatic rise of ram raids. Look, it's really dramatic. Only police didn't start indexing ram raids as a crime descriptor until late 2020, and any data before that is the result of text based automated search functions, like Google, for their own internal systems. They basically did a search for the term ram raid, meaning that it's impossible to give accurate modeling on the number of these crimes. We might have just been in a dip for all we know. It's like the graph of people who are left handed. As being left handed was tracked instead of changed, the number of people who identified as left handed increased. In a graph form, it looks like a rise, but it's not really. It's just the result of changing data sets that better reflect the reality of the situation. But that didn't stop MPs like Sam Uffindell in the Bay of Plenty and, candidate Carl Bates in Whanganui pushing Labour's soft on crime thing that they like to go for. Labour bad, National strong. For over a year before the election and during the collection period of the Stats NZ research collection dates. Now, there is a bit of an irony here, though, in that perhaps those who feel most concerned and less safe because of crime should be concerned. Criminal justice and policy experts keep saying this government's policies are actually drivers of criminal behaviours. The fear-mongering used in the last election, especially in areas that research shows are incredibly concerned on this topic, well, they're the ones that are going to be hit the hardest by the very dumb on crime policies that they voted for. Hello there, kia ora. If I had $1 for every time this government changed a $3 billion major infrastructure project that was desperately needed without an actual replacement plan, just an edict to be cheaper, well, I'd have $2, which isn't much despite the fact that that's what the government thought low-income earners deserved when they gave out their tax breaks. But it is kind of weird that this has happened twice. Yesterday, Chris Bishop and Dr. Shane Reti were in Dunedin, a city that's been calling out for years for a new hospital that's fit for purpose to their community, now and into the future, so that they could tell stakeholders that they needed to rethink the plans and scale back. It took years to plan and settle on designs and begin the process, and the need for a new hospital for the region is something that locals have been calling for years. And the possibility of this exact thing happening was raised as a spectre during the election campaign. In fact, although the election campaign, and up until at least June this year, National was promising that there was nothing to worry about. In fact, they were going to make it even better with more beds. Turns out there was something to worry about. No matter how often they were grilled about it, they kept doubling down, but apparently the costs blew out. Now, no one and no government wants costs to blow out, but when it comes to big projects over long periods, there's lots of factors that can lead to cost changes. Not just the costs of materials or labour or the impacts of inflation, but changing demographics of the area or hospital services can lead to needs for different equipment and expertise than were originally planned. And when cost blowouts happen, tough calls have to be made. So when a hospital needs more money to be fit for purpose, especially on the back of stories like this, which included a 5-hour wait time for a pregnant woman on a really hard chair before she was seen, we know that any government is going to see it as a tricky area when it comes to the decision that they have to make. And a blowout to $3 billion, well, it would have to be a really good, needed reason to continue being funded. Not like a hospital, like landlord tax cuts. Remember this from March? The government landlord tax breaks blew out from 800 million to 2.9 billion. That's just shy of the new estimated cost of the Dunedin Hospital. It's more than the cost of the entire IREX ferry infrastructure upgrade. And yes, that is a lot of money. But it's a lot of money for infrastructure that would be fit for purpose for decades to come. It's a long-term investment into the backbone of the country. And together, the Dunedin Hospital and the ferry upgrades, they're still less than half the total tax cut package National bought in this year, which will cost an estimated $14.6 billion over 4 years. $12 billion of that was to be borrowed. No one denies we need hospitals. No one denies we need fit-for-purpose infrastructure. But the idea of borrowing to pay for those as opposed to borrowing to give tax cuts makes some people really uncomfortable. Mostly the sort of people who work on the ninth floor of the beehive and think forcing people to work in the office will save a CBD decimated by the 6,000 and counting people they fired from leaving the area. The reality is, most New Zealanders would rather not have a $20 a week tax cut if it means people miss out on healthcare, if the country misses out on significant infrastructure. Most Kiwis understand that despite screeches that debt will be paid off by our grandkids, investing in areas our grandkids will still be using is a good use of debt. But if you listen to some politicians, well, any debt is bad, and you'll just have to suffer because of it. On Monday, Nicola Willis, seen here being a little teapot short and stout, announced a change in direction for government sector employees that would see changes to work from home rules in an effort to revitalise the Wellington CBD. While work from home has been shown time and again to result in more productive staff, and Aotearoa New Zealand often comes out at the lower end of productivity reports, the government is sure this change will result in more productivity, once again showcasing that research and data are nice to haves, not need to haves, in the decision making process. Citing the pandemic response now being over, which includes the ending of free RATS tests from this Monday, it's not great. Willis completely forgot that work from home actually started in Wellington, being written into contracts and planned for by management in response to the 2016 Kaikoura earthquake. That or she just doesn't care. Both options are really possible. Right. Greenpeace activists this week occupied the office of seabed mining lobbyist Straterra, which drew praise from Green MP Steve Abel. Minister for putting porn on government credit cards, Shane Jones, seen here learning how New Zealand First supporters greeted each other outside Parliament in February of 2022, described the protesters as vermin. The Greenpeace protesters, not the ones who illegally occupied Parliament grounds, harassed locals, called for executions of public figures, and burnt the playground down. In response, the ACT Party claimed if a right-wing group did the same, media would demand they resign. Unlike they did when ACT endorsed an alt-right fundraiser held by someone who said they wanted to blow up mosque after mosque, or when David Seymour joked about blowing up the Ministry of Pacific Peoples. On Tuesday, media reported that Tori Whānau and Angela O'Leary had appeared on some podcast. Oh, wait, I know that show. For some reason, Stuff focused their story on the car sale, and while the Herald and News Talk did include elements about discussions around mental health and the pressures of public life, they also mentioned Whānau had discussed breaking the law around Māori wards in a subheading which drove angry racist old white men crazy. Good thing they can all scream woke in the comment sections, or they'd be more frustrated than their wives on their anniversary night. To celebrate Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori this year, Education Minister Erica Stanford held off on announcing a $30 million cut in Te Reo language programs for teachers until the week after it finished. The funding will be used to fast-track resources for the new maths curriculum that is being rushed through without proper training for staff to fully get their heads around the changes, based on erroneous data using a single data set from test results that students weren't studying for or taught for. On Wednesday, ANZ CEO Antonia Watson, seen here with some English literature grad, backed calls for a capital gains tax, saying it was a fair form of income tax. Prime Minister Christopher Luxon tried sarcasm on for size in his response when he said, "I love that the CEO of a big bank in Australia wants to take more money off New Zealanders," making it sound like he thought the bank got the money from the tax, not the government. In completely unconnected news, Prime Minister Christopher Luxon this month sold one of his rental properties for just shy of $1 million, making $295,000 in untaxed capital gains. And reports this week show that for the first time in nearly 3 years, the majority of mortgages approved were for investment properties and not first home buyers. Associate Education Minister David Seymour, seeing here trying to dog whistle, this week announced an end to teacher-only days in schools. While there's a comedy trope of teacher-only days being a chance for teachers to get drunk and laugh at students, these days they're actually used for teachers to get drunk and laugh at Associate Education Minister David Seymour. Seriously, though, they're actually used for planning and upskilling days for staff, so they don't use up their own free time to maintain their professional standards, and they're not included in the number of days young people attend school. Truancy is one of the problems this government has focused on fixing by using their tried and failed method of ignoring advice around the actual drivers of problems, instead of saying all the wrong words to sound like they have a fix. Like in this week's press conference, when Minister David Seymour said, and I quote, "Some students are missing up to 10 days a week in lessons." In New York, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs Winston Peters, seen here responding to David Seymour's request that he stop saying things like genocide is bad and Palestinian statehood needs to happen, today addressed the United Nations. At one stage, he told other world leaders to stop talking in the middle of his speech and is quoted as saying, "Growing distrust and division is making international cooperation more difficult," which sounds very statesmanlike until you remember which party was under 5% in the polls until they started riding a wave of conspiratorial distrust and division in our own institutions. And finally, meet the spookfish. It's a new type of ghost shark discovered on the ocean floor in the waters around the Chatham Islands. The scientific name Harriet avia was given to it after the discoverer's grandmother. Ghost sharks live on a diet of crustaceans found on the seabed, accessing them with their long nose-like appendage, and actually have several different identities. They're also known as a chimera, a ratfish, rabbitfish, and elephantfish, which coincidentally are the nicknames I've given to some of the coalition backbench MPs. When asked if the government will look at giving the new shark protected status, Prime Minister Christopher Luxon declined, saying, "We don't do bottom feeding and just focus on the bottom." Oh, and don't forget that daylight saving time starts this weekend. Remember, if you still have an analog clock, to move it forward and to lose an hour's sleep. And if you don't have an analog clock, technology will do it all for you and you'll still lose an hour's sleep, but in a much more efficient way. Random fact for you, daylight saving time was actually instigated by New Zealand entomologist and astronomer George Hudson, so he could have more daylight hours to study bugs, for which he ended up cataloguing thousands of the species, and his collection is now housed in Te Papa. Hey, thanks for watching this week's Omnibus. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, tell people what's going on. You can become a YouTube member and then you get free use of those awesome little emojis that I've created for you, which you can put into the chat that we have on live feeds that we do on Friday nights. My God, things are getting busy. And for the people of Whangarei, I told you that there was going to be something extra for you, so here it is. Hello there, kia ora. Just letting you know that I'll be appearing live at the Treaty and Me public lecture series in Whangarei, presented by Network Waitangi Whangarei. There'll be two sessions on Thursday, November 7, one in the Whangarei Library from 12 to 2 and the other at 116 on Bank Street from 7 to 9. The subject of my talk will be the Treaty of Waitangi, Confessions of a Middle-Aged White Guy, followed by a Q&A session. Q as in question, not Q as in the character from Star Trek. It's easy to get confused about these things. Hey, look, it's a free event and there'll be free coffee and tea and delicious snacks. I do like delicious snacks. So grab a friend, book a spot on the links below, and I'm really hoping that I can catch you guys there. That's right, Whangarei, I'm coming up for a visit in early November. It'll be great to have a look around. I want to check out that art gallery museum thing that you guys have, because I still haven't had a chance to see it, and I'll be giving a couple of talks while I'm up there. Look, make sure you look after yourselves this week. Every week feels exhausting and draining for everybody. Keep yourself informed, but make sure you're looking after your mental health along the way. Because we're coming up to a year that we've had to deal with this government, it's understandable that people's strains and stresses are starting to really show. So make sure you look after yourself and find something to relax with. Until next time, ka kite anō, have a fantastic week. Here, the links to other things that come at the end of YouTube videos.